In this chapter, you shifted from thinking about individual properties and contracts to understanding the big picture forces that shape the real estate world you work in every day. You explored how the market system works, how supply and demand interact with price and value, and how real estate behaves as a special kind of economic product. You also learned how jobs, construction, vacancy, government policy, and local conditions combine to create cycles of hot, balanced, and slow markets. This snapshot pulls those ideas together so you can quickly recall what Chapter 15 was really about: reading the market, not just reacting to it. What you learned about the market system. You began by reviewing the basic market system. Every economy is trying to produce and distribute goods and services to satisfy demand. In real estate, those goods and services include homes, rental units, office space, retail centers, and industrial properties. Supply describes how much of those goods is available for sale, lease, or trade. Demand describes how many buyers and tenants want them and can afford them at any given time. Price is the mechanism that connects supply and demand. It is not just an asking price or a wish number, but the final amount a buyer and seller actually agree to in an exchange. Price is how the market votes on the value of a property at a particular moment. Value itself is driven by 4 questions. How much do people desire the item? How useful is it to them? How scarce is it in relation to demand? Do they have the purchasing power to pay for it? When desire, utility, scarcity, and purchasing power are high, prices tend to rise. When any of these weaken, prices tend to soften, even if other factors remain strong. You also saw how producers think in terms of productivity and costs. To bring a property to market, developers and builders incur costs for land, labor, materials, financing, management, and overhead. They must cover those costs and earn a profit, or they cannot stay in business. Efficient producers with lower costs can compete more effectively and survive when others cannot. In tight markets, the minimum sustainable price often reflects the cost of production plus profit, rather than just what buyers wish to pay. Finally, you looked at market interaction and equilibrium. In a functioning market, if supply increases relative to demand, prices tend to fall. If supply falls relative to demand, prices tend to rise. If demand increases relative to supply, prices go up. If demand drops relative to supply, prices go down. Over time, markets seek equilibrium, a point where supply and demand balance and price, cost, and value line up. But because it takes time for producers and consumers to adjust, real markets are almost always in some state of imbalance, moving toward equilibrium, but never quite sitting still. What you learned about real estate market dynamics. The chapter then turned to the specific dynamics of real estate. Real estate follows the same general laws of supply and demand, but it has special characteristics that make its behavior different from other products. Real estate has inherent product value because land is both scarce and necessary. Each parcel has unique appeal due to its location and features. Properties cannot be moved, so demand must come to the supply. That immobility increases risk when local demand falls. Real estate is illiquid, meaning it cannot be easily or quickly converted to cash without potentially accepting a lower price. It is slow to respond to changes because new construction takes time and completed properties cannot be relocated. And the market is decentralized and local, meaning each city, submarket, and subdivision can behave differently from national averages. You learned that real estate supply is measured differently depending on property type. Residential supply is counted in dwelling units, commercial and industrial supply in square feet, and agricultural supply in acreage. Supply is influenced by development costs, the availability of financing, expected investment returns, community master plans, and government regulations and police powers. Real estate demand is also measured differently. Residential demand is counted in households and depends heavily on quality of life, neighborhood character, convenience, and dwelling features. Retail demand focuses on trade area population, income, competition, and spending patterns. Office demand looks at occupancy costs, space efficiency, accessibility, and building image. Industrial demand emphasizes functionality, labor availability, zoning, environmental rules, and access to suppliers and transportation. A central lesson was that employment drives long-term real estate demand. Base employment represents industries that form the economic foundation of the area and bring outside money in. Total employment includes base, secondary, and support jobs. When base employment grows, secondary and support industries grow, population increases, and demand for all types of space, industrial, office, retail, and residential, increases. When base employment shrinks, demand for real estate of all types eventually contracts. You also studied the real estate supply-demand cycle. When demand is strong and supply is low, vacancy is low, and prices or rents are high. This encourages new construction. As new buildings are completed, supply increases, vacancy rises, and prices ease toward equilibrium. If construction overshoots, the market moves into oversupply. Vacancy becomes high, and prices fall. Construction slows or stops until excess space is absorbed. Over time, absorption reduces vacancy, conditions improve, and the cycle begins again. Construction, vacancy, and absorption move through this pattern repeatedly. Finally, you examine the many influences that speed up or slow down this cycle. Local factors include financing costs, developable land, construction costs, infrastructure capacity, local regulation, changes in the economic base, and the arrival or departure of major employers. Broader national and international forces include changes in the money supply, inflation, national business cycles, and currency fluctuations. Government at all levels influences markets through zoning, development approvals, taxation, interest rate policy, and environmental regulations. A city can even impose a moratorium on building, restricting supply regardless of demand. Together, these insights teach you that markets are not random. They are the result of interacting forces that you can learn to recognize and explain to your clients. Review summary. Chapter 15 taught you how the real estate market fits into the larger economic system. You learned that supply, demand, price, and value are constantly interacting forces, and that real estate is shaped by desire, utility, scarcity, and purchasing power just like any other product. But you also saw that real estate has special traits. It is immobile, illiquid, slow to adjust, and deeply local. You learned how to think in terms of units of supply and demand for different property types, how employment acts as the engine of long-term demand, and how the construction, vacancy, absorption cycle repeats over time. You saw that market conditions are not just the result of buyers and sellers. They are shaped by costs of production, financing conditions, government policy, and shifts in the economic base. As a result, you are now better equipped to look at a market and ask deeper questions. Where are we in the cycle? What is happening with jobs? How are interest rates, construction activity, and vacancy moving? Which local regulations might affect future supply? These questions help you interpret the market rather than simply watching it happen. Discussion. How could understanding base employment help you evaluate the long-term stability of a neighborhood that currently feels hot with rising prices? Answer. When you understand base employment, you can look beyond recent price increases and ask what is driving them. If a neighborhood's demand is supported by strong and growing base industries, such as a major hospital, university, or employer cluster, the demand is more likely to persist. If the price growth is driven mostly by speculation or a temporary event without a strong employment foundation, the area may be more vulnerable to a downturn. Evaluating base employment helps you advise clients whether a hot neighborhood likely has staying power or is at higher risk of cooling quickly. Why is it important for real estate professionals to focus on local market data, even when national news reports show very different trends for home prices and interest rates? Answer: real estate is inherently local, and national averages can hide major differences from one area to another. A city or neighborhood can be appreciating while national prices are flat, or it can be stagnating while the national media reports a boom. Local supply, local demand, local employment, and local regulations all determine what is really happening in your market. By focusing on local data, such as inventory levels, days on market, local job announcements, and local construction activity, you can give accurate advice that matches your client's reality, rather than relying on broad national headlines. Closing remarks. Chapter 15 gave you a set of economic eyes to see your real estate world more clearly. Instead of thinking only in terms of single transactions, you now have a framework for understanding how properties fit into cycles, how jobs and government policies shape demand, and why real estate markets rise, balance, fall, and recover. As you move into later chapters and into real practice, keep returning to these ideas. When you learn to read supply, demand, price, and employment together, you will not only serve your clients better, you will also make wiser decisions about your own investments and career path in real estate.